Okay, let's get started with chapter 5, elasticity. So maybe you haven't encountered this specific term very often in your life, but we may have encountered other similar idea, which is responsiveness, consumer stickiness, or consumer loyalty. So let's first approach this from the perspective of demand, which is a consumer side, and considering that the we are more likely to play the role as consumers or purchasers in our real life. So probably demand is more relevant to our life. So law of demand, as we studied in previous chapters, told us that when prices fall, the quantity demanded will rise. So that gives us an instruction of the direction. And then the following question is by how much, which is magnitude. So that is what we are to study here. So before getting into depth, let's first figure out one thing. According to this illustration, price fall is the trigger, and a quantity demanded that changes is the consequence. So say, for instance, assuming away any quality deterioration in the goods, say if it is the same good, if all of a sudden the price decreases, what do you want to do? Probably you want to buy more, right? Even if you can't consume it right away, probably you want to put this in your storage to save for later use. So that is the idea. In this illustration, price changes is the cause, and the quantity demanded is the response, namely the consequence. So after figuring that out, yeah, this is a summary that I added. So Q is the consequence, P is the cause, and similar to what we have learned previously in a linear form, y equals to a plus bx. Y is the dependent variable, namely the consequence, depending on x, which is the independent, which is the cause. X changes by itself, then it leads to changing y. So here, similarly, it is P price changes by itself, then it causes consumer or supplier to adjust their quantity accordingly. And slope, which is to evaluate the change, that is calculated as delta y over delta x. Here you can see the consequences at the top, while the cause is in the bottom. And here elasticity is similar in terms of position. So percentage change in y is in the top, percentage change in q is in the top, and the percentage change in p is in the bottom. So it's always consequence per cause. So that's how we calculate this. Price elasticity of demand is percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. For instance, if there is a 15% discount on the price of t-shirts and it leads to a quantity demanded by 25%, so 15% of the price change is the cost, and the quantity demanded that changes in response to the price change is the consequence. So this is how we calculate this. 25% over minus 15 equals to minus 1.67. And because here, percentage change in quantity demanded and percentage change in price in the context of demand, they are always of the different sign, opposite sign. Let me be specific. So the elasticity of a demand must be negative. That is because of law of demand, right? If price increases, quantity demand will decrease. If things getting more expensive, you don't want to buy as much, right? If price decreases, quantity demanded will increase. If it's getting cheaper, then you want to buy more. So the price elasticity of demand is a negative number. Okay. The negative sign gives no additional information over law of demand. The negative sign only tells you it is demand. It doesn't mean that the negative sign has no implication. This is one thing that I would like to clarify. Okay. But the magnitude after figuring out the meaning of the sign, which tells you whether it is demand or supply, if the supply, as we discussed, price and quantity change in the same direction, then for supply, it is positive. So the sign tells you which type of elasticity it is, right? And then the magnitude, right? The absolute value of the elasticity tells you whether a consumer is elastic or not, namely responsive or not. So elastic is defined when the absolute value of the percentage change in quantity is larger than the absolute value of the percentage change in price. And this tells you why we do this division, right? Because this division tells you which one is bigger in between this denominator and the numerator, right? So here, in this case, 25% is the numerator, 15% is the denominator. So 25% is bigger than 15%. So the result of the division is greater than 1. That tells you the consumer is elastic. In this case, right? That tells you the consumer will respond to 1% price change with more than 1% change in their quantity demanded. So that's basically the idea, right? So elastic is responsive. And inelastic is the opposite when the absolute value of the percentage change in quantity is smaller than the absolute value of the percentage in price, namely the absolute value of the price elasticity is less than 1, the quotient is less than 1, right? Telling you the denominator is greater than the numerator, the cause is greater than the consequence. It takes more of the cause so as to lead to the same change in the consequence. That's basically the idea. Then, in that case, the buyer is not responsive to the change in price. So that's basically the idea. So that's the inelastic case and irresponsive case. Or in other words, in your daily language, it may be the case where it is the case where the consumer is loyal to the product. The consumer is sticky to the product. Why is that? Because no matter how much the price change, the consumer seems not be so much irresponsive to that price change. If price increased by 20%, they only cut short their quantity consumed by 1%. That means the consumers are loyal. Their mind are set. They are addicted to a product, which is a good sign, probably something that all firms wants to achieve, right? You have such a loyal consumers. And by the way, that's why a lot of times firms nowadays wants to track your consumer consuming pattern so as to learn your habit. And it is a habit, and we are it's common that it's difficult for us to change your habit over a short period of time, then possibly define the path of the pattern of consumption that you are quite inelastic with or loyal with. Okay. So I'll leave to you to read for the story. And then in terms of the graph, okay, and this is a framework where quantity is in the x-axis, price is in the y-axis. It's a inverse structure. In that inverse structure, okay, if this demand curve is flatter, the consumer is more elastic. If the demand curve is steeper, the consumer is more inelastic. Okay, so one thing to note is that elasticity is not necessarily the same thing as the slope, but we can infer this. We can infer the elasticity from the slope. This is how we do that. We use our intuition basically to see how responsive consumers are to price. So let's look at one extreme case, which is perfectly inelastic. Perfectly inelastic, according to our previous interpretation, that is when no matter how much the percentage changes, the consumer doesn't respond to it at all. Inelastic means irresponsive, right? So here, let's look at this curve. Here, this means no matter how much your price is, the consumer is stuck to this quantity consumed. You don't change at all, right? In that way, the consumers are not responsive at all, namely perfectly inelastic. Perfectly elastic means the consumer can do anything. I don't need your price to change. I'm so flexible to change my quantity, right? And in that way, the consumers are very easy to be lost. Even if you don't do anything, you can't even predict how much the consumer will purchase. So that's basically the idea. And then the case that is closer to the perfectly elastic case, which is a perfectly horizontal case, where price is in the y-axis, which is this case, right? That is relatively more elastic. It takes little bit price change to cause the quantity, which is the width, right, in the horizontal axis to change a lot. And inelastic case, it takes a lot price change, but still the quantity won't change as much, right? So that is basically the idea. And intuitively, what determines the price elasticity of demand? Well, think about substitutability, or I use a more easily pronounced word, alternative. How easy it is for consumers to find the alternative of the good in question. So let's read through those 5 different points. The first one, more competing products means greater elasticity. Okay, so here it means there are more similar close substitute that you can find. That's what this competing products means. For instance, if the price of one pasta brand doubles, you might buy a different pasta brand instead. Given that we have a lot of pasta brand. So here again, it is that alternatives are easily available. Okay. And for airline example, demand is more elastic for shorter flights, for which driving is a reasonable substitute. So here, not only we have different flights to choose from, you can also choose other ways. Train, driving by yourself, Uber, whatever it is, right? So when you have a lot of alternatives to substitute the current option, then consumers are very elastic with the current option in question. Okay, so that's point 1. Point 2, specific brands tends to have more elastic demand than categories of goods. And necessities have less elastic demand. Consumers' surge makes demand more elastic. Demand gets more elastic over time. Okay, so how do you understand this? So the second one is, if you're thinking about, for instance, gasoline, if I'm talking about the broad category of gasoline, it is very difficult for us to live without gasoline or gasoline derivatives, for instance, plastics, right? So can we live without it? No. In that way, we are very dependent on gasoline and its derivatives. So if crude oil price increases, then we know, oh, because we are inelastic in this, we still have to use gas to drive every day. We still have to use plastic products, unfortunately, every day, right? So we know we can't avoid it. Even no matter how much the price fluctuates, you drive 10 miles each week for your work, you still have to drive pretty much the same. So in that way, we are affected by that. We're inelastic with the entire broad category. But if it is a specific brand that has an issue, for instance, if BP's gas price increases, we can go to Mobil. We can go to Shell. we have a lot of alternatives to go to, right? So that's why specific brands tend to have more elastic demand than the entire category. So it's easy for you to switch brand, but it's not easy for us to shun away from gasoline for all. Necessities have less elastic demand. Again, it's like the gasoline example that I mentioned, right? Gasoline is a necessary, food is a necessity. Electricity is a necessity. No matter how much the price fluctuates, you still have to drink certain amount of water, eat certain amount of food every day to survive. So that's basically the idea. Okay. So price fluctuation, we as consumers are not too much responsive to that. Consumer search makes demand more elastic. You search, you have more information, and it's more likely that you find alternatives. And when you find those alternatives, it's harder for certain brand to stick you there, right? So last one, demand gets more elastic over time. Again, it's like a finding search thing. At this moment, you may think, oh, this is something that I have to do. This is some product that I have to buy. Missing this opportunity, I will have no other opportunity. But if you stay patient in the long run, probably you can find more better choices, better alternatives, better substitutes. So again, with substitutes increasing, that gives us opportunity to flee away from the current option, and then we can become more sensitive to the price, because now that we can move away if price changes. So that's basically the idea of those determinants, and different consumer, different person, and different product, they may have different elasticity. Some people are more Pepsi guy, some people are more Coke person, right? So that means different consumer may be loyal to different products. Again, it's a business related concept. That's why certain brands tries to give you discount and try so that you try their product, and hopefully after certain free trial period, you have developed your stickiness, your loyalty to their brand, and in the future they can potentially raise the price higher or reduce the capacity, which is de facto a price raise. Okay, so now how do we calculate elasticity? The textbook mainly introduce the midpoint method. So we are calculating percentage change of each price and quantity, right? So here the midpoint formula is percentage change is the change, right? So first we need to calculate the change as the numerator, x2 minus x1, and then it's the change as the percent of whatever. So now for the midpoint, we are using the average to be the value to compare to. So for instance, in this example, right, if price changes from 1.5 to 2.25, the difference 2.25 minus 1.5, that's the change. And we are using a certain value to compare to. So it's the change compared to the midpoint, which is the average between the price. So that is to say this change takes up 40% of the average price. So that's the percentage change, the change as a percent of what? And here it's the change of the percent of the average value between these two. And the quantity, the same. It is the change 60 minus 72 over the midpoint, which is the average between 72 and 60. And the difference, which is minus 12, is 18.18% of the average between 60 and 72. Okay, so after calculating both, we calculate the quotient. right? So we have percentage change in Q, percentage change in P, and it's percentage change in Q over percentage change in P. That's how we calculate elasticity. In your homework, you will be asked to use another method, which is called simple percentage change method. Okay. So what we do is here, instead of using the midpoint, we're using the old price and old quantity to compare to. So you still calculate the change in that case, right? For price 2.25 minus 1.5. And now you are calculating how much percent this changes to the original starting price, 1.5. And for quantity, you calculate the difference, again, 60 minus 72, as a percentage of the starting quantity, 72. And after calculating those, you calculate the elasticity. Okay, so that's the two method of calculating elasticity. So now, how does business use demand elasticity? Actually, I have foreshadowed a little bit, right? With elasticity, we can navigate, we can identify the loyalty of consumers, and then if you know consumers doesn't reduce the quantity purchase too much, then you can increase your price at very low risk of losing your consumer, right? So here, what exactly it is? Well, we're evaluating the revenue of the business. Remember that the revenue of business is P by Q, okay? And here, elasticity is to tell you the magnitude relationship between P and Q, which one is greater, right? So elasticity is right in its use to tell you the consequences of price change or quantity change to the total revenue of the firm. Okay, so if this demand is elastic, a decrease in price will cause revenue to rise. If this demand is elastic. Okay. So yeah, what does that mean? I'm actually showing you these two scenarios. The first one is that let's look at the consequence of decrease in price. So here, if price decreases, there are two possibilities. If the consumer is elastic, what happens? In response to the price decrease, the quantity will increase a lot. That is an elastic, very responsive consumers. So what does that mean in real life? 10% price discount, you have, say, 200% quantity increase, right? And this is the method that I'm introducing to you, which is called the arrow method. I draw the arrow, and the length of arrow tells me the magnitude. And here we have a little price decrease that triggers very big, that amplifies the quantity increase of consumers. And then the quantity increase with a longer arrow dominates the price decrease that the firm sacrifices, right, as the bait. Then, consequently, revenue will increase. And if consumers are inelastic, what happens? It takes price to decrease a lot for quantity to increase a little, right? Again, it's like, it could be something like necessity. Even if the price reduce, by 50%, you're still gonna use your electricity by a certain volume every day, right? You have your highest capacity, even if you turn all the lights on of all your house, it's not gonna, your total consumption of electricity will not increase too much in response to the price change. Therefore, I draw a big arrow down, I draw a small arrow up, telling you that consumers are not responsive to the price reduction. And here you see the firms makes a lot of sacrifice to reduce its price, but consumer don't give it too much attention or response. Consequently, price reduction dominates the quantity increase, and it ends up with revenue decrease. And I'm discussing another case, which is price increase in another picture. So here, I'm just using my intuition. I don't even have to draw. You can refer to the graph and draw those new revenue, old revenue to see the change. But using intuition is good enough, right? Here, if consumers are elastic, recall that in this case, this demand curve is flat, close to the horizontal case. So that is the case where the consumers are elastic. So consumers are elastic, a little bit price change will cause a lot of loss of consumer because they are fishy. they are like fish, they are slippery. They have a lot of alternatives. If your product increases your price, they can flee away to some other close alternatives, right? Then in that case, revenue will reduce or will decrease. And if it is the opposite, consumers are pretty inelastic. In this case, the demand curve is close to the case where it's perfectly horizontal, perfect vertical, right? That's a perfectly inelastic case. So in that case, it takes a lot of price change for the firm to lose their consumer. That actually gives incentive for firm to overprice their product. So you see, especially for those big brands, for those fancy French name, bags, Louis Vuitton, stuff like that, for instance, they know their consumers are not sensitive to price. It's only rich people can buy that. Then they increase 10%, 20%. Quantity will not decrease too much. And also because they're good brands, right? That's why those brands, they do a lot of commercials. They do those fashion shows or whatever to make sure that their brand image is maintained well. And in that case, they increase their price. Quantity consumed will not decrease too much, and their revenue will increase as the consequence. Okay, so look at this question. If a firm raises the price of its product by 15% and so 10% fewer product, so first we need to identify the consumer elasticity. So price increase by 15%, which is the cost, and the consequence 10% smaller than the cost, so the consumer is inelastic in this case, right? And with inelastic consumers, you increase your price, the quantity only decrease less than that, right? And therefore, the increase in the price dominates the loss of consumers, and then your revenue increased. This is exactly the case where the firm wants to do. And that's why a lot of firms, they want to create their own different brand. They want to differentiate themselves, as this Starbucks example that elaborates. So this is the intuition of elasticity. So there are three things that you need to master. First one, intuition. Second one, the graph. And third one is the numeric calculation. I hope this can be helpful. Thank you very much.